Welcome. This is so great to be here and be part of Bloomberg Green. My name's Gail Gallie. I'm the co-founder of something called Project Everyone, who are the unit behind the UN Sustainable Development Goals. But we're here today to talk about the issue of the day, which is climate change. I'm really happy to have this opportunity. We have some amazing speakers with us, drawn from different fields, different walks of life. And as we were just finding out in our warm-up together, very different situations right now on the ground, but all united in our desire to make positive change towards achieving the climate goals, and within those, all of the SDGs. So welcome, thanks for coming. I have Hindou Ibrahim here, SDG advocate. I have Lily Cole, who is a model, author, actress, and also activist, particularly when it comes now to sustainable fashion. Noel Kinder, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer for Nike. Up front, as I said, I lead the Global Goals campaign. The Global Goals were an historic agreement agreed to 5 years ago in the United Nations, signed by every country in the world. And they are a plan to fix climate change, inequalities, and move us forward to a sustainable and just world. We are faced today, as they turn 5 years old, with an historic opportunity to really step up the pace to achieve them. We're talking about climate change today. It has now been joined as the issue of the day by a pandemic. The goals house both of those issues. How can we learn from each other, and how can we inspire action to make sure we get back on track when it comes to fixing climate change? And this is why I'm so glad to be part of Bloomberg Green. It's an amazing lineup of people discussing such an important issue. And so let's get started. Hindou, how are you? I want to find out how you are, where are you, and what have you been doing during the lockdown?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm doing well. I'm happy compared to many other peoples that experiencing a flood back home now, and many other indigenous communities that experiencing a very terrible COVID-19. So I am also lucky to be in a place where I get access to the internet, where I can communicate with the peoples. It is not the case of many other communities, and especially in my communities, who do not have even access to turn on a light, just a light, without talking about the internet. So yeah, I'm so glad to be with you.
And Hindou, you always seem cheerful and optimistic. Where do you draw on to keep going?
Well, being optimistic, I think it's coming from the life that I'm seeing from my own community. So when you go to the indigenous communities, I'm coming from a nomadic pastoralist peoples who depend from the rainfall, depend from the season when they get pastures and water. So they do not depend from the end of the month's salary at all. But those peoples used to be happy and hopeful because they protect the nature where they are living on it, where they can get food, when they can get medicine. So when I go back to my community, then I see the life that they are living. It gives me more hope to come back at the international era or at the national level even to fight for them, and then to give me the optimistic way that if my peoples who do not get any like university certificate, but who know how to protect the environment, who know how to heal themselves, and who can live in harmony with nature. So I can get the peoples who went to the university, who living in the city, to change the mind and go back, live in harmony with our nature.
Oh, thank you, Hindou. I feel that's a great start. You brought those people very much into this conversation, so we will try and keep them with us as we move through. Thanks. Well, Noel, now I know that you're in Portland, Oregon, which is suffering all sorts of problems at the moment. How are you doing?
Well, I'm good, all things considered. We were talking before we came on about the wildfires in Portland, and I was telling Gail that just the other day it was stated that Portland had the worst air quality in the world, which I spent several years living in Southeast Asia, and to come home to the northwest of the U.S. and have that be the case, I think it's a pretty stark reminder of the environment we're living in and the challenges that we face from climate change. So it's been challenging over the course of the last couple of months, but Oregonians are pretty resilient. So to Hindou's point, it's inspiring to see people come together, even in the face of the destruction of wildfires and people losing their homes, to see the way that they've been resilient and helped each other out through a really, really tough time.
And you have a big job, Noel. You're the Chief Sustainability Officer for Nike. And that's, I imagine, a very big job at the best of times. And let's not say these are the worst of times, but they're definitely challenging. How do you find resilience and optimism in yourself just to keep going, lockdown and all?
Yeah, like you said, this is not an easy time, but I really consider myself incredibly fortunate to have a job like this. I get the responsibility and the pleasure of leading a sustainability effort for one of the biggest brands in the world. And I think what gives me optimism is when I look around at other companies our size, almost with daily regularity, you see more and more commitments to the adoption of renewable energy, products that are based on sustainable principles. I think that there are just legions of examples out there where companies are starting to realize that their purpose needs to be more front and center, and that integrating their purpose into the way that they operate and the way that they engage with their consumers has to be at the forefront. And so that really does give me optimism.
No, that's great. And again, thanks for bringing that into the room. So I feel like we've got the people with us, and now we have business with us. And so, Lily, I'm going to come to you as a sort of somewhere in the middle, as an activist. Tell us how you've been. Where are you coming from right now? Where are you?
I'm in Portugal, in South Portugal, where luckily we, touch wood, don't have forest fires right now, but know the forest fire situation well, because Portugal and California, I think, and a few other places in the world have suffered a lot in recent years. And I guess on the question of optimism, for me, optimism is a choice that I try to make every day, some days more successfully than others. It's not a kind of prophecy of how I think things are going to play out. Indeed, actually, I think if you look at the kind of scientific data and the reality of our situation, I think there's many reasons to not be optimistic. But I think we all have the capacity in any given moment to change the future, to rewrite the narrative, to fix the problems that we have.
I agree with you. I think there's been a spirit delivered in the pandemic of it turns out we can. Yeah, like turns out we can do some pretty amazing, ambitious things quickly and together in a way that perhaps we have been calling upon from the climate community, but we have felt maybe we're beyond our grasp. But turns out we can do a whole heap of stuff when we really try. You wrote a book on this, I believe, before the pandemic, right? Who Cares Wins, which was on the subject of applying radical optimism. Have you been knocked in your faith in the last 6 months, or has it been renewed?
Well, it's interesting because the byline of the book is Reasons for Optimism in Our Changing World. And then it literally signed off and was going to print when the pandemic really hit, at least in Europe. And so we quickly squeezed in a preface addressing what our changing world might mean in 2020. And I think it's had both effects. I think that everything feels more viscerally real, like the emergency, the sense of the kind of climate crisis emergency feels more real. But as you say, the kind of appetite and potential for action and large-scale action also feels really clear and profound in a very powerful way. The thing that I feel often gets overlooked, and I keep trying to bring back into conversations like this, is that COVID is deeply connected to the climate crisis. That if you look at the UN Environment's report on why this pandemic happened and how we can avoid future pandemics of this nature, all of the driving factors are also related to the climate crisis, in terms of the way that we manage animals and the intensification of animal agriculture, the way we are eroding wild spaces and space for wildlife. So for me, it's part of the climate crisis. It's part of the environmental picture.
I agree with you, and I will boringly always interject about the goals when I see an opportunity, but I think that is exactly the point of the goals as a holistic system. You know, that you can't have health there and climate over there. It doesn't work. You know, you can't have young people here and old people there and women there and men there. You know, the whole point is we need to improve together moving forward. So I'm glad you brought those in. Thinking of the goals and the climate change progress or not, there has been much made of some of the improvements, right, during lockdown of some of the targets and indicators, things like clean air, forest fires notwithstanding. You know, there's been many pictures of beautiful Himalayas over Indian cities that haven't been seen for generations, and dolphins in Venice and How do we feel about those? Do we feel like these are profound and lasting changes? And I'm just interested in your different fields. So Hindou, I'm going to come to you first. You work a lot with Indigenous female leaders, so loads of goals in that one. I feel like you're quite a frontline activist in that sense. How has the pandemic hindered the work of the female activists that you work with?
Well, I mean, pandemic hit the work of all the communities, and especially when we talk about Indigenous peoples. Let me tell you firstly, in Amazon, we have more than 20,000 deaths just from the pandemic. Wow. And there are a lot of thousands around the world from Indigenous communities. And the female activists, we wake up and come all together. That was really amazing because I got like a lot of webinar between me and my other Indigenous colleagues from Latin America, from Asia, across Africa, just discussing and sharing what is going on. Because for ourselves, we wanted to understand what is going on first. So this is the communication, because there are so many things going on, going around. We didn't know which kind of information as activists we need to get and give to our communities that need it. So it's helped me to understand also from Indigenous peoples on US, they already have in the system to put the old people separately when there are any crisis of vulnerability that's coming. And it is the same cases in the Amazon, and I found it is the same in my own community. So we share that and we say maybe this is our best way as Indigenous women activists to use our own governance system to put our communities in safe. And that's helped me during the implementation of the project back home, to give the information to my community's leaders and then to tell them that we need to save firstly the old peoples, and secondly how we can use this information translated in our mother tongue to understand. If you do not understand things, you cannot do the measure. And lastly, for my peoples who do not have access to the clean water to drink, so it has been very difficult to ask them the water to wash them hands 4 days or 5 days a day. So just so our measure is close up the community. No one can get in. And if someone have to go out, he have to wear the mask and he have to wash his hand and come back to the community without any contact with the vulnerable groups.
Noel, I'm going to come to you and talk of a similar angle, but from the business perspective. I think one of the positives and great things about working with the private sector when it comes to achieving any of the goals is their ability to think long term, right, and think beyond this current moment right now. And I know that Nike have just announced a big kind of project called Move to Zero. I wondered if you might tell us that, because I think we take heart from strategies like that, because they give us a sense of really moving forward in the right direction. Tell us more about it.
Sure. Well, I've been at Nike for 21 years now, and sustainability has always been part of one of the strategic priorities, strategic frameworks that we have. But back about a year ago, we launched Move to Zero, which is our aspiration to achieve zero carbon and zero waste. And so it's really a rallying cry for us as a company, starting internally with the way that we operate, including things like powering all of our owned and operated operations with 100% renewable energy. We've partnered with Iberdrola in Europe, actually, and that project will go live here almost any day now, that will power all of our European operations with renewable energy. We've already done that in the US. So it's really, it's a vision that we've created to transform our operations to continue to leverage the foundation we've already created to be more sustainable. And that includes things like I said, operations, the way we transport projects in the US. We now offset all of our digital orders. So anything you order on .com, Nike.com in the US is actually the carbon footprint is offset. So we're looking at all the different ways across the enterprise that we can influence the carbon footprint and the waste that we create as a big multinational with a really complicated supply chain. And then, of course, product is super important as well. And some of you may have seen Space Hippie, which launched a few weeks back, which is really a way that we can kind of show what's possible on sustainable products. So using waste as the feedstock for a lot of the materials that went into that product, and really being deliberate about consciously lowering the carbon footprint of the products that consumers buy.
And this is what I find interesting when a massive company like Nike make a big move like that. Do you At the moment, do you think there is a spirit of collaboration between, other big companies? Do you think they look at you and get inspired up, or do you think they were like, oh, we're not going to touch sustainability because that's Nike's thing? I sense it's moved, but I hope you would agree.
It absolutely has moved. I think that that's one of the things that gives me optimism as well, is that I have phenomenal relationships with nearly all of my colleagues, all of my peers throughout my industry, and even beyond that. And there's really this assertive, deliberate approach to collaborating with each other pre-competitively. So whether that's looking for ways to collaborate and adopt renewables in the extended supply chain, working on things like the UNFCCC fashion industry commitment, the Fashion Pact, which is a European-based group that's aiming to not only advance reduction in carbon, but eliminate single-use plastics in our supply chain. So I think that, to your point, Gail, those things have just proliferated exponentially. And I think that we're really in a new space where everybody within the fashion industry, that at least that I have contact with, really is looking for ways for us to collaborate and accelerate our respective progress. Because the reality is, as big as we are as a brand and as big as our global supply chain is, as many people as we touch around the world, this is a pretty massive problem that's really, really complicated. And we're going to have to work together in order to solve it.
I think it's not, I haven't seen this written, but I'm fascinated by this concept of, because we've all gone virtual like we are now, because most of us haven't been into offices, there's something happened about the removing of physical walls has helped metaphorical walls, and they come down for collaboration. So the fact that we've all been on these screens reaching out to people all over the world all the time, there's a different, and then we've all been scared for our lives because of the pandemic. There just feels like, and again, this is a hugely optimistic stance, but there feels like there's been quite a seismic shift away from that silo, which was reinforced by the walls of your office or your factory or your town. And we've moved into a space where, because you can collaborate with anyone at any point, people are. I feel like there's been quite a kind of momentous clash between those two things, and it's enhancing collaboration. You mentioned the fashion industry a few times because, of course, you have foots in all sorts of camps as a brand. Lily, I'd love to ask what you think the impact on the fashion industry has been in terms of, it was on a journey, I get that. There was great changes happening, the pact, the UNFCCC, as you mentioned, lots of great moves. And then the pandemic has hit, and I can assume absolutely hammered business the way that it's hammered lots of other businesses, at least temporarily. What's your feeling of how that industry is going to pick itself up and keep moving in a sustainable direction?
It's a good question, and one in a way I don't feel, if I'm honest, necessarily equipped to answer, because I don't work on the ground in fashion anymore. I have a sustainable eyewear brand that I work on, and so I know the impact that the pandemic has had on that as a very small sustainable company. For us, it's been, a complete pivot to focus on direct to consumer online sales. And I get the sense that a lot of other companies have had a similar pivot. It hasn't in any way compromised our commitment to sustainability. And in fact, actually, we've started making face masks with offcuts of waste from designers like Vivienne Westwood and Simone Rocha. We did a bunch of different charity initiatives. So in a way, it galvanized us to do more. But I would imagine that a lot of companies won't be able to afford, I think there's a risk that some companies won't be able to afford the philanthropic commitments or sustainability initiatives that they were planning. I think that's a real risk we have to consider. The conversation I had with Imran at Business of Fashion recently was quite insightful, because he was asking about changes to business models, if not so much to do with the pandemic, I think partially to do with the pandemic, but more in relationship to the reality of the kind of the science and what we have to think about in terms of sustainability. Can fashion be sustainable? Can the idea of trends and seasons and kind of relentless buying and shopping ever be sustainable? And that was really interesting to hear, because I felt like that is a conversation that has been quite taboo in fashion, even in kind of sustainable fashion for many years. It's like, yes, we can make products better. Yes, we can try and minimize waste. We can look at sustainable materials. We can try and close loops. But are we going to question the fundamental premise of capitalism that fashion is a good example of, but you see across other industries too, electronics, furniture, etc., of buying. And can we come up with new business models that are sustainable and that will support jobs and support industries without that level of consumption? And even the fact that conversation is happening, and I think there are some interesting business models in fashion, whether it's renting clothes, or recycling initiatives that are starting to think differently about that level of production. And I think that's a conversation that has to happen. I'd be interested actually to hear if Nike's got any thoughts on that.
I think also what I'd like to hear from Nike also is this thing about things can change really fast is what I've observed. What was not news or not an issue, 6 months, a year ago, can become suddenly the absolute table stake of doing business. And it feels to me like that all the things you're talking about there, Lily, is going through, it's a wave of change that is escalating out of control, and in a good way, I think, in fashion. I don't know, Noel, would you agree that the changes are coming thicker and faster than ever?
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think anytime you have any sort of crisis or series of crises, as we're all living through right now, it absolutely accelerates change. The mantra that we've been using, at least within Nike, for sustainability is innovation. So innovate on the product side. And Lily, to your point, using more sustainable materials. What are we making our products out of? Where are we getting those materials? How are those materials made? Because that, for us, that makes up the lion's share of the carbon footprint of a product, is really the materials that go into it. And then integration, which is massive for a company like us. And by that, I mean integrating sustainability in everything that we do. I mean, sustainability for a company like Nike literally touches absolutely everything we do, from the way we design product to the way that we ship it to the way that it shows up in a retail space. And so embedding sustainability teams end to end throughout the company to make sure that we're really trying to touch every aspect of the way that we operate. And then to your earlier point, collaboration, which for me means pre-competitively with our competitors. Could be Adidas, could be Under Armour, could be H&M, really focusing on those areas where we have common interest and shared incentives to do things that will advance the agenda.
I'd like to pick up the point about collaboration again and come back to Hindou, if I may. I said at the beginning, you're like a frontline activist. I feel like you're really on the ground with these Indigenous peoples who know what to do. As it's been said many times, they know how to manage their environment. They know how to kind of weather the ups and downs of the climate. And do you feel the rest of the world is collaborating with them now, more or less, than before the pandemic? And if we're not, what can we do?
Well, collaboration, it's really a big need, especially in this time. But if the world is collaborating with Indigenous peoples, and especially now, I can say no, because the pandemic, it's hitting more and more the poorer peoples, and then Indigenous peoples are among those who are in the remote areas. Are they taking into consideration? I can say no, because even the information that we need are not reaching out to our communities. But it is possible to do it. I can say yes, because we start listening from Indigenous peoples during climate change. We have the Paris agreements for the first time recognize the 5 references of Indigenous peoples, recognize that Indigenous peoples' traditional knowledge are very critical and very helpful to climate solutions. And they also recognize that our participations are very important because we can only be the one who can talk about our knowledge. And we have also the ESPER group of the climate change, the IPCC, who recognize the Indigenous people's knowledge are very helpful to restore the land. So it's possible because there are already a recognition at the very high level. But the collaborations, it's not putting Indigenous people as beneficiaries, that you have the problem, we will come and resolve it for you. But how they can change this one by taking Indigenous peoples as partners. We wanted to be the partners because we are also holding the solutions. We are also helping the world to move forward. We are the best one who can know how to protect our forest from the fire, because it is the most diverse ecosystem when you go to the Indigenous land in Amazon or in Congo Basin. And my communities know how to restore the land in the Sahel. When they live from one place to another one, they know how to find the fresh water. So if they respect our rights, they take us as partners. So the collaboration must be a reality, but not being in the other side and they decide on our way, on them way, sorry.
Fantastic. Unsurprisingly, I agree. I'm going to ask you, Noel, a final question to you about the goals, because as we've worked together before on the Business Avengers project, I'm actually wearing the Business Avengers version of the Global Goals pin. The Avengers are a group of 17 world-leading businesses who have all aligned themselves to the goals. And actually, we're considering a fashion Avengers brand extension. Maybe we'll talk about that another time. But tell us a bit, if you could, about how Nike has worked with the goals and perhaps how they are supporting Nike's climate agenda.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think when you have frameworks like the goals, it centers everybody on the priorities. And when you have the ability to say, these are the things that are the most important, and as we discussed before, when you have moments in time that refocus everyone, all the stakeholders across the planet, whether it's indigenous communities, big businesses, governments, multilateral institutions, when you have a framework like the goals, it just enables progress that much faster. I think it gives you a focus and an order of priority as to what's really important, and brings people together in a quicker, more deliberate way than in the absence of a framework like that. And so for Nike, we've signed up obviously to be the business avenger, the champion for climate change, because we really believe strongly that if there's no planet, there's no sport. And so we feel like we have an obligation, and we have an incredible reach as a brand to be able to communicate the importance of tackling climate change and the influence and leveraging the influence that we have with our size, our scale, and our ability to communicate to the world to demonstrate the importance of taking action. And so I really think that the goals and the frameworks and the group collaboration that those goals bring together are incredibly important for accelerating change.
Fantastic. Well, we're delighted to have you as well. Thank you. Lily, I'm going to come to you for the last question, which is about this notion of a reset, which I'm sure we've all heard in different guises. World Economic Forum called for it. Financial Times called for it. Imperative 21 are calling for economic system change as a reset. If you could, it's a massive question, so it's a bit unfair to ask you and ask you to end on it. But if you could just think about how we were before, and one thing that's going to change as we move forward. You know, you've always called this moment a portal that we choose to go through lightly and embrace the possibilities of the future. If you could reset one thing about people and how they're behaving going forward, what would it be?
Cool. That's a big question. Yeah. I mean, I don't think I have to choose in a way, because I think it's happening. I think we're in an unbelievable process, and it's hard to know how it's going to manifest. But I feel like it's happening collectively and individually too. I was in Davos at the beginning of the year, and I'd spent the week with climate scientists who'd gone there to set up the Arctic base camp. And at the end of the week, I joined the youth climate strikers when they did their march. And I give this as an example just to say I was literally in tears by the end of the day, because it just felt so surreal to me that you have a group of teenagers begging basically the global community and the kind of very powerful global community that Davos represents to listen to the scientists, to do something as simple as listen to science. And this is obviously in January. And then since then, obviously, the world has changed in many ways. And I think what my hope would be is that there's been a lot of rhetoric in the last few months about listening to science, and politicians saying, you know, we're listening to the experts, we're listening to the scientists in terms of how they deal with the pandemic. And I guess one hope I would have is that that continues, and that we continue to listen to scientists, and we use them as a benchmark to design our policies, design our businesses, design our communities and our institutions, so that we're less so that we can anticipate crises and we can anticipate challenges rather than react to emergencies in future. Because I don't think the pandemic is going to be the first crisis that we face. Like, if we look at the science, there are lots of other risks around the corner, and we have to kind of act as a global community to mitigate those. And I think we have an opportunity right now to act, to try and do that personally, collectively, politically.
Thanks, Lily. I think we'd all agree of standing behind the science. Thanks so much, everyone. I think that is us out of time. I'm going to wrap just by saying thank you for bringing in the people, Hindou. Thank you, Noel, for bringing in business. Lily, those great thoughts about everything, people, community, and the rest. And I think we all stand together in the hope that this is going to get better. If anybody would like to watch tomorrow, the United Nations have made the first ever virtual TV broadcast around the General Assembly, which is obviously not happening. It's called Nations United, and it covers a lot of these topics in it and features some of the SDG advocates, to Beyonce, to Burna Boy. So that is going to be out on YouTube in your time zone tomorrow. So check that out. Thanks again, everyone. Thanks for having us, Bloomberg Green. Have a great day.